Welcome to Orthodoxy Live, an ongoing mission that is a collaboration between the Departments of Christian Education and of Internet Ministries for the Eastern American Diocese of the Serbian Orthodox Church, with the blessing of His Grace Bishop Irene. Our goal each week is to bring interesting speakers and guests to share a little bit about the Orthodox faith with the world. And today, our guest speaker is Mr. Stephen Christoforou, who will be speaking on the topic Dealing with Distractions, How Silence Cuts Through the Noise and Opens Us to the Reality of God's Presence, here on Orthodoxy Live.
Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill to men. We praise Thee, we bless Thee, we worship Thee, we glorify Thee, we give thanks to Thee.
So now I would like to welcome Stephen live from New York. Good evening. Welcome to Orthodoxy Live.
Hey, Father, it's great to be here with everybody.
Well, I could tell you it is a joy to have you here with us. I will say I was pleasantly surprised when I heard that Proto-Deacon Jovan had booked you to offer a lecture tonight. For those of you who are meeting Stephen for the first time, he is a graduate of Yale University, Fordham School of Law, Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, and is also the Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries for the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, and also Camping Ministries as well. But I know him, and maybe some of you know him more as from the host of Be the Bee, an absolutely fantastic YouTube series of videos, and I mean fantastic. They may be targeted at youth or young adults, but I think absolutely everyone can dive deeper into the faith through these wonderful videos. After the lecture, I'm going to post a link to the complete series in our live feed, so you can check those out. Over 150 videos that have garnered over 400,000 views. Thank God, that's a tremendous amount of work, and good work at that. Today, Stephen is going to be offering us a lecture here on Orthodoxy Live, but before he begins, I'd like to remind all of you out there that the goal of Orthodoxy Live is not only to present topics live to all of you, but it's to offer a forum for interaction and engagement. So be sure to post your questions in the comments because I'll be monitoring the live feed throughout the talk. And if your question is on topic and appropriate, we will present it to be answered. So that being said, Stephen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks again. It's really great to be here with everybody, especially on a Sunday night. We had the blessing of the liturgy today. Obviously, we're getting ready for the new week. Although it's been these are weeks that we've had it's been a weird year. There's no two ways around it. It's been a very, very weird year, unfortunately. And one of the pluses and also one of the minuses of this year is that we're spending, I think, a lot more time online than we used to be. I mean, even programs like this, right, are kind of a response to our social distance, a response to the pandemic, a response to the realities of 2020. And on the one hand, it's great. It gives us an opportunity to connect with each other in a new way. On the other hand, there's a downside to it. Just as kind of a little bit of a footnote on today's conversation, I recommend a documentary that's available on Netflix now called The Social Dilemma. It talks about the rise of social media and the way that it's actually led to, just to be blunt, right, an incredible rise in anxiety, in depression, in suicidal ideation, which I think kind of makes sense. And I think we can probably all experience it a little bit during the course of the last few months, the fatigue of being online all the time, the fatigue of being connected to our phones, connected to our webcams and computer screens, right? The way that I feel sometimes, I don't know if you feel like this ever, I kind of feel like there's a fire hose connected directly to my brain that's just pouring stuff into it, right? All the news, all the data, all the photos, all the responsibilities, right? Like you have this pressure to post yourself, you have this pressure to stay on top of the things that other people are posting. I don't think it's a surprise that there's been this rise in anxiety and depression, but also I think there's a really interesting disconnect and a tension between the way that we present ourselves online and sometimes the reality of our personal struggles, right? I think this is one of the reasons why suicidal ideation even is something that has gone up remarkably, drastically with the rise of the social media age. And here's another statistic that's more recent. Over the course of the last few months, 1 in 4 young adults have contemplated suicide. as things have gotten bad. Now, maybe that's kind of a response to just things getting tough in 2020, but I think there's also probably a connection to the way our brains are simply not equipped to handle all of the noise of being so incredibly connected and so incredibly online all the time. Like all of this data leads us to have a fog, right? I said before, it feels sometimes like it's a fire hose that's just pouring directly into our brains. It's hard to see through that, right? It's hard to see if somebody's spraying you in the face with this jet of water. Maybe another way to think about this is if you're glasses wearers, if anybody is a glasses wearer out there, if it's cold outside, as it's getting again, you're wearing your glasses outside, you go into a building that's nice and toasty and warm. What happens? Your glasses tend to fog up, right? You could be standing in front of your best friend. You could be standing in front of an incredible painting, whatever it is. You can't see anything because that gray, that sort of amorphous gray, is standing between you, your eyes, your ability to perceive and see, and whatever beauty is in front of you. And I think that our connectedness, I think this fire hose into our brain has kind of created this gray layer that separates us from the reality of the beauty that's out there, that separates us from the reality of our connection, right? It's one of the weird things about our connectedness online. As we have become more connected, as we have had this ability to chat with each other online, we're actually feeling more disconnected. We're feeling more lonely. We're feeling more unseen, unheard, anxious, depressed. This, I think, is this gray, the gray that happens when your glasses fog up. And it changes the way that we see each other. It compromises our ability to see each other. It compromises our ability to see ourselves clearly as well. I think it's taking a toll. Like, I don't think there's any coincidence to the fact that society seems to have gotten a lot angrier over the course of the last few months as we've spent all this time. Like we're spending like just fighting and getting angry and vilifying each other. Things just seem very gray. Things seem very gray. I'll give you kind of a silly example of this, right? I'll give you a silly example of this. I have wooden floors here. Sometimes I wear socks when I'm in my apartment. And of course, like you're walking around on socks on wood floors, that can be a little bit dangerous. I remember one time the doorbell was ringing and, I kind of like rushed from my office to go to the door. And of course my foot slipped and I slipped into like a little bit of a corner and that's a terrible feeling, right? Stubbing your toe is one of the most painful sort of mundane experiences that we have, right? I remember that everything kind of contracted to this point. Like in that moment, right? I remember I'm hustling down the hallway. I'm excited about this package that's coming. But when I stubbed my toe, everything else just sort of like faded away. And all there was the experience of this throbbing, terrible, indescribable pain in my toe. Everything else kind of faded away, right? I couldn't see, couldn't think of anything else. It was just ouch. That's all there was. And I think sometimes this fog that we have on our glasses, this thing that sort of prevents us from seeing ourselves the way that we are, that prevents us from seeing each other the way that we really are, also kind of puts this masks over us, right? It's this pain. It's this disconnection. It's negative emotion that actually becomes this filter. And that's sometimes all we can focus on, right? The more that we kind of consume news online, the more angry that we get. The more that we see other people post these really attractive photos of themselves on their vacations or whatever it is, the more insecure that we might feel about our bodies, about our socioeconomic status, whatever it is, right? The more we kind of focus on that pain. Pain has a really weird way of capturing the attention. Like when I stubbed my toe, that's all I could focus on. And I think sometimes when we're online, it actually creates a little bit of pain within us. And our minds and our attention begin gravitating towards these negative things, judging other people for their political beliefs, being envious of people because of the way that they look or their lifestyle or whatever it might be. There's a lot of gravity that gets us to be distracted from each other and that gets us to be kind of like focused on this gray rather than the reality of what actually is. Something that we say, kind of like the Sunday school answer, right? We say that each and every human being that we encounter is an icon of Christ, is a living icon of Christ. That's what we say. That's kind of like the Sunday school sort of like answer. But I have a feeling that that's not the way that most of us live our lives. That's not something that is actually like corresponds with our reality. Even if I say in my head, like, okay, every person I meet is an icon of Christ. Every situation that I encounter in my life, God is there at work, but I don't always see it, right? There's a difference between what is and what I actually perceive, because I'm walking around with this gray a lot of the time. Think back to the last time somebody said something mean to you. Think back to the last time you got angry at somebody. Visualize their mind, their face, if you want to in your mind. When you think about that person who said or did something mean to you, do you think there walks an icon of Christ? Or are you thinking some four-letter words that we're probably not going to share in polite company? Right? Again, that pain has a way of distracting us from the truth of what actually is. There's a lot of these surface things, this gray that prevents us, right? And I think this is why I love the metaphor of being the bee, because being the bee is precisely the opposite of that. You think about what a bee does. A bee goes from flower to flower. It doesn't matter how big or small the flower is. It doesn't matter how many petals the flower has. It doesn't matter the color of the petals, whether it's orange or purple or white or whatever it is. It goes straight to what's beneath the surface. It goes and it takes that nectar, that pollen, and it transforms it and it shares it as honey with the world, right? That's our task as Christians, to be able to cut through the noise, to be able to cut through the surface level things that can sometimes distract us. Like we as people are stuck sometimes with like the surface level things. That gray, our pain, our jealousies, our insecurities, whatever it might be. And we fail sometimes, unfortunately, to get to the core of who we are. We forget that we are loved children of God. And the core of what is in every other person that we encounter. Every person we meet is a living icon of Christ. Every person we meet is a child of God. But sometimes we're stuck. We have that gray filter that prevents us from actually seeing what it is, right? Just like me, when I stubbed my toe, all I could think of was that pain. That became this thing that distracted me from the present that was awaiting me at the door. Our own insecurities, our own pain, whatever it is, prevents us from seeing ourselves clearly. It prevents us from seeing other people clearly. And I think over the last few months, like that haze has actually gotten thicker. It's gotten stronger, which is the reason why we're more angry, which is the reason why we're more disconnected, even though we're also more connected, right? We feel lonelier, even though we are more connected. Anxiety, we feel more anxious, we feel more depressed because our glasses are fogging up. That's my experience, right? Stubbing my toe. Compare that experience to a different Steve, Saint Stephen, who, if you remember from the Bible, in the book of Acts, he was one of the first 7 deacons. He was out there preaching the gospel. People said, don't do that. He kept doing it. The reward that he got was he was stoned to death. Right? He was stoned to death. People took these big, heavy, sharp rocks and they threw them at St. Stephen until he died. Not a fun way to go, right? And yet, as he was being stoned to death, this great saint of the church looked up into the heavens and he saw Christ sitting on his throne. And as like giant, heavy, sharp rocks are being thrown at this saint, right? Can you imagine the pain that he was experiencing? He looked up to Jesus and he prayed for the people who were doing this. He said, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Which was exactly the last words of Jesus on the cross, right? So there's me stubbing my toe and forgetting everything and focusing only on that pain. And there's St. Stephen actually being stoned to death and having the clarity to see the Lord on his throne, having the clarity to see that these people around him are still, despite their sin, icons of the living Christ, and they still deserve love. He saw something that I normally don't, right? St. Stephen didn't have fog on his glasses. St. Stephen is a really wonderful example of what it is to be the bee and actually find the truth, to cut through the noise, to cut through the appearances and see what actually is. Christ actually on his throne, and each and every one of us actually icons of the living God. How do we get there? How do we get there? I think our experience over the last couple of months is that we're actually taking a step backwards, right? If our anxiety is ratcheting up, if our disconnection is ratcheting up, if our anger is ratcheting up, I think we're taking a step backwards individually and also as a society. So that's why I think now, as we're so connected, as we're spending so much time on our phones, as we're spending so much time in front of our computer monitors, we're Zooming, we're Skyping, we're this, we're thating, right? And it's making us feel so negative. It's building up all of these negative things that are actually affecting the way that we respond to each other, affecting the way that we think about each other, right? Because we don't have the same generosity of spirit that St. Stephen did. We're not out there asking the Lord to forgive people. We're out there criticizing each other and getting angry at each other. And now we're out there setting things on fire, right? There's so much that's bubbling beneath the surface. And I think there's a connection between the volume of material that's pouring into our minds, all of the noise that we're experiencing from being so connected. Because if you look at St. Stephen, if you look at the great saints of the church, one thing that was a part of their lives, which is increasingly not a part of our lives today, is silence. The ability to disconnect from these distractions, to disconnect from these illusions, to disconnect from these temptations, to disconnect from seeing the Instagram photos that other people are posting that are making us feel insecure about ourselves, to disconnect from some of these clickbaity article titles that are making us just get so angry about the state of the world. Disconnection, which actually then opens up the door for real connection, right? Because St. Stephen, who was able to pray for the people that were literally killing him, is far more connected than any of us are. He didn't have Skype, he didn't have Zoom, he didn't have FaceTime, he didn't have any of that stuff, but his heart was open to the people around him. And it's an interesting paradox about our time now that the more we are connected, the more our hearts are closing to each other. The more our eyes are being covered with this gray that prevents us from seeing each other as we actually are. So I want to give you just two little practical things to try to do a little bit more of in the days and weeks and months ahead. One, unplug a little bit from it. And I know you might have to spend a lot of time on your computer, your phone, whatever it is for school or work, but unplug. Maybe after a particular time during the course of the day, your phone, your laptop, whatever it is might be, stays in a different room than you are. You know, I have done this a lot in my life. I will fall asleep scrolling on my phone. And I think to myself, oh, it's because I have my phone as my alarm, right? I need it next to me. And then, of course, I wake up the following morning. And the first thing that I do before I say good morning to the Lord, I say good morning to Instagram. But what if we unplugged a little bit more? What if we actually could close our lives as human beings, not glued to a monitor, right? With our last thoughts of the day, thoughts of gratitude to the Lord, rather than thoughts of anxiety because of what we're seeing and what we're sharing. And what if our first thoughts when we wake up in the morning are, again, thoughts of gratitude for the Lord, not, again, having this screen that is glued to our eyes? Can we unplug a little bit more than we have over the course of the last few months? Can we simply leave our devices, even if it's for a few extra moments during the course of the day? How can we each unplug as best we're able? And number two, how can we take time during the day to simply be still? You know, this is one of the hard things, I think, of 2020 as well. A lot of people are working from home. A lot of people are doing school from home. The boundaries between what we're supposed to do and where we rest are kind of getting blurred. And it's getting harder for us to disconnect, to be distant from our work, right? Everything seems kind of mixed up. But I think one thing we need to do is the silence that St. Stephen experienced, the silence that the monks on Mount Athos experienced, right? We may not be able to do it to the same extent as them, but we can spend a few minutes every day with our eyes closed, just putting ourselves in God's presence, not worrying about what we're posting, not worrying about what we're reading, not worrying about this falling apart, not worrying about how people perceive me. Just being with the Lord. Sitting in our room, standing in front of our icon corner, whatever it might be, whatever works for you, some level of just stillness. You know, because here's one of the other beautiful things about stillness. So much of the time we spend online, we're doing stuff, right? We're kind of like, I think about this too. Like, I remember I was taking a walk the other day and the sky looked really beautiful. And I was like, oh, that would be a really great photo for social media. Like, I was pulled out of the experience of something beautiful because I was thinking about making this thing and sharing this thing and the likes that it would get. whatever it is, right? I have this weird sort of inner pressure to perform, to post the right things, to say something witty, whatever it might be, to perform, to do, to jump through hoops. The wonderful thing about being still, simply placing yourself before God, is that when you're doing that, you're doing literally nothing. You're doing nothing. You're not saying any prayers necessarily. You're not thinking of something clever to say. You're simply sitting and being and just being open to the Lord. And we need that because God loves each and every one of us exactly as we are. There's nothing for us to do to earn it. In other words, we spend so much of our time online trying to earn likes, earn followers, earn this, perform in such a way that we're going to receive the esteem of people. God loves us exactly as we are. And doing nothing with him, just being there, just standing in front of our icon corner and gazing into the face of the Lord, or sitting quietly with your eyes closed, maybe smelling the smell of the incense in the air, if you can burn a little bit of incense, or just simply listening to the sound of the trees, the wind through the trees, and just being still for a second. You don't have to do anything to earn the love of God. What a relief. During a really crazy year, when things are happening and things feel like they're breaking and we have all of this pressure upon ourselves, unplug a little bit more and be still a little bit more and experience not the judgment, not the gray haze that prevents us from seeing ourselves as who we are, but actually experience that love of God. So that's my 2 thoughts for the day. It's good to be with you all, connected as we are, but hopefully when we're done, we can at least begin to think about how can we unplug a little bit more? How can we be still a little bit more?
I have to tell you, that was a wonderful and very timely talk. As a father who has a few kids that did at home learning, and now what was already a pretty connected home has now become even more connected. A lot of this certainly resonated here with me. We had a couple of questions come in. First one is hearkening back to the story of the stubbed toe. And John asked if you ever did get the package. So I'm going to assume
I did eventually.
you eventually got there.
After I screamed just into the void, I did eventually compose myself. Yes.
Okay, that's good. That's good. We just close that loop there.
Yes, thank you.
The second was, and this comes from somebody, but definitely something that I can feel as well from my own family. Do you have any advice for parents whose children are feeling anxious in these times? Because even when we try to disconnect, it is difficult not to be totally saturated in the news and the negativity, and to see this world that's changing as, you know, when they go out to the store and everything looks different, and just there's anxiety that is hitting, at least in my home, children at a younger age, but for whoever asked this question as well, this just feeling of unease. And if you've got a little something as director of youth and young adult ministries, I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think now we're sort of getting into some of the layers, right? Because I think if we can take time to have a breather, right? If we can say that when we're at the dinner table together, our phones are off or somewhere else, or after a certain time, our phones go into corner, I think that helps and that begins. But I think the other thing for us as parents, as friends, just as human beings, is that we need to create safe spaces where we can talk and share about a lot of these things. Like, a thing that I realize with not just like kids, teenagers, not just young adults, I think it's really kind of a human problem. This becomes the paradox of the way that we are more connected yet less connected, because we're trained, I think. One of the things that social media trains us to do is to present sort of a facade, right? Like, if you're going to post a photo, it's got to be a nice looking photo. If you're going to post a thought, it's got to be funny and quippy, right? Social media tends not to be a place where we share weakness or what comes across as weakness. And anxiety can feel like a weakness, right? Confusion, worry can feel like a weakness. And I think that we actually have kind of like lost the ability to just be vulnerable with each other and share some of these things. So one of the other things to do, check in with each other, right? How can we create a safe space where a kid can share with his or her parents how he's feeling or how she's feeling without any judgment, right? Without the parent like stepping in to fix it necessarily, but just to be like, to have an ear that's ready to listen and a heart that is open. I had a rough day today. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling nervous. I went outside the other day and all the masks are making me feel very scared or nervous, whatever it might be. To begin, because there's this, again, it's that paradox of connection which leads to disconnection. It's all these walls that have come up in our hearts, and emotions are meant to be had, right? Emotions are meant to be processed. They're meant to be shared with each other. We share our joys, we share our struggles. And I think the more we can sort of separate from the superficial false connection and create time for real face to face, like holding a hand, putting an arm around somebody, how are you doing today? The more those walls can hopefully tumble down, and we can just be honest when we're having not so good days and when we're having good days, whatever it might be. Our hearts can become a little bit more transparent to each other. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's a wonderful answer. I look forward to catching one of my kids after this and putting my arm around them. Although I kind of know how their day was today. It's a Sunday day in the house. But we had a question that kind of went back to the boundaries between work and life that are blurred right now. And somebody that really desires to find silence in some moment where they really are thinking about nothing. But I know at seminary, our Dr. Rossi, who would talk to us about silent prayer, would say that's about the time that barrel of monkeys would go jumping around inside your head. The moment you try to become silent and just let yourself be open is the time we are tempted to let our minds even go into thoughts of worry and anxiety. And I wondered if you had a strategy that might help somebody who's looking to just start giving a few moments over to silent openness that might help them through that initial shock of trying to let their brain calm down a little bit.
Yeah. Yes, because it doesn't come natural. It doesn't come natural. I mean, I remember for me, the first time I ever visited Mount Athos was, I think, the first time that I ever actually experienced silence. Which, as a kid growing up in New York, like, you're used to the taxis honking, you're used to the profanities, you're used to all of that stuff just being the background noise of your life, and how terrifying it was when I first made it to the monastery and I kind of took a walk after dinner and just kind of sat there, and I heard nothing but the lapping of the waves far below and the sound of the wind through the trees, and then suddenly all this stuff that was inside began percolating up. When COVID started, we actually were doing these silence workshops. We're doing them via Zoom. We recorded one of them. So one of them actually is on our YouTube channel. It's just like a very simple tutorial that we go around and actually do. So if you want kind of the long version of the answer, you can find that on YouTube, just like a silence tutorial. But we like to break it down to just kind of like a 4-step process, which is, it's kind of very, very simple without going into too many of the details, right? Find a quiet place. So many of our inner life is kind of like shaped by our outer life, right? You're not going to be quiet on the inside if your phone is buzzing next to you, if the radio is on, whatever it might be. Find a quiet place. Then what you want to be able to do is really like use your body. This is what we do when we fast, for instance, right? It helps sometimes to close your eyes, to eliminate one level of input into your brain. Helps to take a deep breath, right? Because deep breaths actually have a way of sort of stilling the heart. It helps to then, like, the third step is to really not focus on your thoughts to the extent that you can. This is why a lot of the advice that you get about stillness is to sort of focus on your breathing, right? The mind normally isn't very capable of multitasking. So if instead of like thinking about these thoughts, if you simply like focus on the physical act of breathing, right? Like, you can do it right now in your room. Focus on the feel of the air on your skin. Is it cool? Is it warm? If you take a deep breath, which we do thousands of times a day, just kind of be attentive to the feeling of the air as it enters your nostrils, right? As it enters your sinuses, if you kind of pay attention to it over a couple of breaths, you can sort of follow that feeling actually into your lungs as your lungs expand. If you're focused on this very small thing, there's not that much cognitive space for you to think about these other things, because your mind is sort of like, your attention is kind of coming to a point. But then the fourth tip that we offer is not to get discouraged, because it's kind of like a muscle. It's going to take a little bit of work. It's not going to be easy, right? Again, this is kind of like the very simple sort of thing. If you want to follow along with one of the silence workshops we've done, you're more than welcome to. It's also obviously a question to talk about with your spiritual father. Like, what is something that you, right, with your own particular temptations and the way that your particular mind works, what is a way that you can be a little bit more still? So that's kind of I think a place to start. But it's a good question.
Well, and this is a question that, and in fact, a couple of these were very similar as these questions have come through. We've had one other person talk a little bit about silence on here, and it is something people are very curious about and they desire very much in their lives. So I'm going to look for that link to that silence workshop, and I will do my best to post that to our diocesan Facebook page as well. So after this is over with, you can check that out. But I think that might be all we have for questions tonight. So Stephen, thank you. This was wonderful, and I can tell you I am looking forward to sharing this lecture and the Q&A with our church school parents, because I think this is something that will not only find them where they are, but also with their children in this kind of new world in which we're living right now. For all of you watching, I'm going to post a link to Be the Bee in just about 10 seconds before I hit the off button. Stephen, thank you again. God willing, when I come to New York next, I come, not infrequently, I'm going to look you up.
Yeah,
and
that'd be great.
meet you somewhere for coffee, masked up, social distance, and all of that.
Cool.
But to everyone else here with us tonight, thank you. God bless you, and I look forward to our next interview on Orthodoxy Live.
Yes,